What happens when the daughter no one wanted becomes the only one who can save them all? Tonight, I'm bringing you a story of betrayal, survival, and power reborn in the harshest frontier you've ever seen. A girl marked as cursed, a warlord feared as death itself, and a choice that will shatter everything. Stick with me until the very end. You won't believe where this goes. And if you love stories where the underdog rises from the ashes, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's get started. The hall smelled of smoke, old leather, and blood that had soaked into the floorboards over decades. Kaelira Voss stood at the edge of the room, her veil hanging heavy over her face, the rough fabric scratching against the scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. She kept her hands folded, her posture small, invisible. That was the safest way to be in the house of Voss. Her father, Lord Grivon Voss, sat at the head of the long table, his thick arms crossed over his barrel chest. His face was all hard angles and old cruelty, the kind that didn't need to shout to make you afraid. Around him sat her brothers, Corvain, the eldest, with his sharp eyes and sharper tongue, Lytos, broad and dull, who laughed too loud at everything, and Surin, the quiet one, the one who watched and waited and struck when you weren't looking. They were talking about her. Again, she's the perfect choice, Corvain said, leaning back in his chair, a smirk pulling at his lips. The Alpha asked for a bride. We give him one. What could be more generous? Lytos snorted, reaching for his cup. Generous, right. You mean we're giving him damaged goods and calling it a gift? Exactly. Corvain's smirk widened. He insults us by demanding tribute. We insult him back, and when he rejects her, we take offense. The council will back us. They're already itching for a reason to move against him. Kaelira's fingers tightened against each other beneath the veil. She had heard this before. Whispers in hallways. Conversations that stopped when she walked past. But this was the first time they'd said it so plainly, so carelessly, like she wasn't even in the room. Because to them, she wasn't. And if he doesn't reject her? Surin's voice was quieter, more dangerous. If he accepts? Grevin's laugh was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. Then the poison does its work. Either way, Darian Thorne dies. And the frontier is ours. Kaelira's breath stopped. Poison. They weren't just sending her away, they were turning her into a weapon, a disposable one. Her chest felt tight, her pulse hammering in her ears. She wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but she stood still. She always stood still. That was what her mother had taught her before she'd died, before the fever took her, and left Kaelira alone in a house full of men who looked at her like she was a mistake that hadn't been corrected yet. When do we send her? Lytos asked, already bored. 3 days, Grevin said, drumming his thick fingers on the table. The convoy leaves at dawn. We'll make it look proper. Gifts, guards, a full procession. Let him think we're honoring the old ways. And the girl? Saren asked, his eyes flicking toward Kaelira for the briefest moment. Does she know? Grevin didn't even glance her way. She doesn't need to know. She just needs to go. Corvain laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. What's she going to do? Say no? They all laughed then. Even Saren's mouth twitched. Kaelira felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, that had broken years ago. Something harder. Something that had been holding her together all this time. She turned and left the hall. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. Her room was small and cold, tucked into the north corner of the estate where the wind howled through cracks in the stone. The servants never bothered fixing it. Why would they? It was just her room, just the ugly daughter's space. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hand shaking as she pulled the veil from her face and let it fall into her lap. The scar was raised and pale, a jagged line that split her face like a map of something broken. She'd gotten it when she was 6, a fall from a horse, her head striking the edge of a stone trough. The healer had done what he could, stitching her up with thread that pulled too tight, leaving her skin puckered and uneven. The pain had been unbearable. But worse than the pain was what came after, the way her father looked at her, the way her brothers stopped talking when she entered a room, the way the servants whispered. They'd hidden her after that, kept her veiled, told the other families she was sickly, delicate, not fit for public life. And Kaelira had believed them. For years, she'd believed that she was the problem, that if she could just be quieter, smaller, less visible, maybe they'd accept her. But now, sitting in the dark with her father's words echoing in her head, she understood. She wasn't the problem. She was the solution, the convenient one, the disposable one. They were going to send her to the Alpha, a man so feared that even saying his name made people lower their voices, and they were going to use her to kill him. And when it was done, when the poison worked and Darian Thorne was dead, they'd blame her. They'd say she was a spy, a traitor, a monster, and no one would question it, because who would defend the ugly daughter of a house that never wanted her? Kaelira stood, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Outside, the wind tore through the bare trees, and beyond that, past the walls of the estate, lay the forest. The wild frontier. The place where her father's power ended and something older, darker, began. She had never been past the gates, never been allowed to. But she was going now, one way or another. Her hands moved before she could think too hard about it. She pulled the small pack from beneath her bed, the one she'd kept hidden for years, filled with things she wasn't supposed to have. A knife with a leather-wrapped handle, taken from the armory when no one was looking. A flint and steel she'd traded a servant for. A water skin, patched and worn. A map she'd stolen from Corvain's study months ago, marked with trails and safe houses and places the traders used when they didn't want to be found. She didn't have much, but she had enough. Kaelira wrapped herself in her heavy cloak, the one that had been her mother's, and tucked the veil into her pocket. She wouldn't need it where she was going. She slipped out of her room, her heart pounding so hard she thought the sound alone would wake the entire house. The estate was quiet. The guards were lazy, used to a life where nothing ever happened. Kaelira knew their routines. She'd watched them for years from her window, memorizing their shifts, their blind spots, the moments when they got sloppy and started drinking or gambling instead of watching. She moved through the shadows, keeping close to the walls, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The side gate was old, the lock rusted and neglected. She'd oiled it weeks ago, just in case she ever got the courage to do what she was doing now. The lock clicked, the gate creaked, the sound too loud in the stillness. Kaelira froze, waiting for the shout, the footsteps, the hands grabbing her and dragging her back. But nothing came. She pushed the gate open just enough to slip through, then pulled it closed behind her. And then she was running. The forest swallowed her whole. The first night was the worst. Kaelira had thought she knew what the wild would be like. She'd read about it in the estate's dusty library, poring over old books about explorers and traders and hunters. She'd heard the servants talk about it in hushed voices, swapping stories about wolves and bears and things that didn't have names. But reading and hearing were nothing compared to being in it. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than three men standing side by side, their branches twisting together overhead like claws reaching for each other. The ground was uneven, thick with roots and rocks that seemed to shift under her feet, trying to trip her. Every sound, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, every distant howl made her freeze, her hand going to the knife at her belt. She kept moving. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get far enough away that they wouldn't find her, far enough that when they realized she was gone, it would be too late to drag her back. But the forest had other plans. The rain started just after midnight, cold and relentless, soaking through her cloak in minutes. Kaelira stumbled forward, her boots slipping in the mud, her fingers going numb. She tried to find shelter, but everything looked the same. Dark trees, wet ground, shadows that moved in ways that made her skin crawl. She didn't know how long she walked. Hours, maybe. Or maybe just minutes that felt like hours. Time didn't work right out here. When she finally stopped, she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. She found a hollow beneath a fallen tree, the space just big enough for her to crawl inside, and pulled her cloak tight around her. Sleep didn't come. Just cold. Just the sound of rain drumming on leaves and her own ragged breathing. At some point, she started crying. Not loud, sobbing cries, just quiet tears that slid down her face and mixed with the rain. She didn't even know why she was crying. Relief, maybe. Or fear. Or the sudden crushing weight of realizing that she was completely, utterly alone. She'd never been alone before. Not really. There'd always been servants, guards, her brothers moving through the halls. Even when they ignored her, they were there. Now there was nothing. Just her and the dark and the rain. Just in bad boss. Borsinkan. By the second day, she was starving. The dried meat she'd packed was gone. She'd eaten it too fast the first night, not thinking about rationing. The water in her skin was low, barely enough for a few more swallows. And the map, the one she'd been so proud of stealing, was useless. The trails it showed didn't match anything she could see. Either the map was old, or she was lost. Probably both. Kaelira tried to forage, the way she'd read about in the estate's old books, but she didn't know what was safe to eat and what wasn't. She found berries, small, dark, clustered on low bushes, and ate a handful before her stomach cramped so hard she thought she was dying. She wasn't dying, but she spent the next few hours curled up beneath a tree, retching and shaking, her body rejecting the poison she'd stupidly put into it. When the cramps finally passed, she lay on the cold ground and stared up at the canopy. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that promised more rain. No sun, no stars, just gray. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should have stayed. Let them send her to the Alpha. Let them do what they were going to do. At least it would have been quick. At least she wouldn't be dying slowly in the mud, alone and forgotten. But then she thought of her father's laugh, her brother's smirks, the way they talked about her like she was nothing, and she got up. The third day was when she realized she was being followed. She'd been hearing things for hours, footsteps that didn't match her own, branches snapping in the distance, the feeling of eyes on her back. At first, she told herself it was just paranoia, the forest playing tricks on her exhausted mind. But then she heard voices. Kaelira dropped into a crouch behind a thick oak, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing. There were 3 of them. Men, dressed in ragged leathers and furs, their faces hard and scarred. One of them had a bow slung over his shoulder, the wood dark and well-worn. Another carried a long knife, the blade stained with something that wasn't rust. Outlaws. The kind her brothers talked about with a mixture of fear and contempt. The kind who lived in the spaces between settlements, preying on travelers and traders. "Thought I saw something," the one with the bow said, his eyes scanning the trees. "Probably a deer," the one with the knife said, spitting into the dirt. "Or a wolf. Or a lost little lamb." The third one grinned, showing teeth that were yellow and broken. They laughed, and the sound made Kaelira's skin crawl. She tried to stay still, tried to breathe quietly, but her body was shaking and her legs were cramping from crouching, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold this position. Then a fourth man, she hadn't seen him before, came around the other side of the tree and grabbed her by the arm. "Well, well," he said, grinning down at her. His breath smelled like rot. "What do we have here?" Kaelira yanked her arm back, but his grip was iron. She reached for her knife, her fingers fumbling at her belt, but he was faster. He twisted her wrist until she cried out, and the blade fell to the ground with a dull thud. "Feisty," he said, dragging her into the clearing where the others waited. "I like that." The others circled her, their eyes moving over her like she was something they could take apart and sell piece by piece. Kaelira's heart was racing, her mind screaming at her to run, to fight, to do something, but she couldn't move. She was frozen, just like she'd been frozen all those times in the hall when her father and brothers talked about her like she wasn't there. "She's got a veil," one of them said, reaching for the fabric that hung around her neck. Kaelira jerked back, but another man grabbed her from behind, his arms locking around her shoulders and holding her still while the first one yanked the veil away. They all went quiet. Then they started laughing. "What the hell happened to you?" the one with the bow said, his face twisted in disgust. "Looks like someone took a knife to her and stopped halfway," another one said, leaning closer. "Or maybe she was born like that, some kind of curse." Kaelira's face burned. Her chest felt like it was caving in. She tried to pull free, but the man holding her just tightened his grip, his fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. "Let's see what else she's got," the one with the knife said, reaching for her pack. And then the forest exploded. It wasn't an explosion, not really, but it felt like one. One moment, the outlaws were laughing, their hands on her, their voices filling the air. The next, there was a sound, low, rumbling, almost like thunder rolling through the trees, and the man holding her was gone. Kaelira stumbled forward, catching herself against a tree. She turned, her breath coming in gasps, and saw him. Darien Thorne, She knew it was him even though she'd never seen him before. There was no mistaking it. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the clearing like a force of nature. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, pulled back from a face that was all sharp edges and cold authority. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and when they locked onto hers, Kaelira felt the air leave her lungs. He wasn't handsome, not in the way the bards sang about, but there was something about him that made it impossible to look away. The outlaw who'd been holding her was on the ground a few feet away, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Dead. The others had their weapons out, but they were backing away, their bravado crumbling. "You don't want to do this," one of them said, his voice shaking. Darian didn't answer. He just took a step forward, and the outlaws broke. They ran. He watched them go, his expression calm, almost bored. Then he turned back to Kaelira. She didn't move. Couldn't move. Her legs felt like they'd been nailed to the ground. He took a step toward her, and she flinched. "Easy," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I'm not going to hurt you." Kaelira's hand went to her face, her fingers brushing the scar. She wanted to cover it, to hide, but her veil was on the ground somewhere, and she didn't have the strength to reach for it. Darian's eyes followed the movement. He looked at her scar, his expression unreadable. Not disgusted, not pitying, just looking. "You're far from home," he said. Kaelira nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "And you're alone." Another nod. He studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes taking in her torn cloak, her muddy boots, the way she was shaking. Then he held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. Kaelira stared at his hand. It was large, scarred, the knuckles rough and calloused. The hand of someone who'd spent his life fighting. She should have been afraid. She should have run. But instead she reached out and took it. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she was from or why she was in the forest alone. He just led her through the trees, his pace steady and sure, like he knew every root and rock by heart. Kaelira followed, her legs shaking, her mind spinning. This was Darian Thorne, the Alpha, the man her family wanted dead, the man they'd called a monster, a warlord, a threat to everything they held dear, and she was walking beside him like she belonged there. They reached a clearing just as the sun started to set, the light turning everything gold and red. There was a camp, small, well hidden, with a fire already burning low in a stone-ringed pit. Two men stood as they approached, their hands going to their weapons until they saw Darian. Then they relaxed, though their eyes stayed on Kaelira. "Found her in the forest," Darian said, his tone clipped. "She needs food and water." One of the men, a younger one with a scar across his eyebrow and a face that looked like it smiled often, nodded and gestured toward the fire. "Come on, sit." Kaelira sat, her body aching, her mind still trying to catch up to what was happening. The younger man handed her a water skin, and she drank greedily, the liquid cold and clean and the best thing she'd ever tasted. "Easy," he said, pulling the skin back gently. "You'll make yourself sick." She nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Darian crouched beside her, his pale eyes locked on hers. Up close, she could see the lines around his mouth, the scars that cut through his eyebrow and along his jaw. He looked older than she'd thought. Harder. "You're going to tell me why you're out here," he said. It wasn't a question. Kaelira swallowed hard. Her throat was still dry, her voice barely a whisper when she spoke. "I was running." "From what?" She hesitated. The words were there, sitting heavy on her tongue, but saying them out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. "From them," she said finally. "My family. They were going to—" She stopped, her chest tight. "They were going to use me. To kill you." Darian's expression didn't change. He just watched her, waiting. "They were going to send me as a bride," she continued, the words coming faster now, tumbling over each other. "But it was a lie. There was poison. They were going to slip it into your food, your drink, something, and then they were going to blame me. Say I did it, and I—" Her voice broke. "I couldn't let them. I couldn't be part of it." The silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. One of the other men coughed quietly. "Why tell me?" Darian asked, his voice still calm, still even. "Why not just run? Disappear. You could have gone anywhere. Because it's not right, Kaelira said, her hands clenching into fists. What they're doing. It's not right. And you, she looked up at him, meeting his pale eyes. You deserve to know. Darian stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, his movements deliberate and controlled. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk more in the morning. And then he walked away, leaving Kaelira alone by the fire, her heart still pounding, her mind still reeling. She'd done it. She'd told him. And now she had no idea what came next. The younger man with the scar sat down across from her, holding out a piece of dried meat wrapped in cloth. Eat, he said. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. Kaelira took it, her hands shaking. Thank you. I'm Jace, he said, nodding toward the other man who was tending to the fire. That's Ren. And you just met the boss. The boss, Kaelira repeated, tearing off a small piece of meat. It was tough and salty, but it was food, and her stomach growled in appreciation. That's what we call him, Jace said with a half smile. Well, when he's not around. Otherwise it's my lord or alpha, or whatever sounds respectful enough not to get us punched. Ren snorted from his spot by the fire. He's never punched you. Only because I'm smart enough not to push him. Kaelira ate slowly, listening to them banter. It was strange being around people who talked to each other like this. Easy, casual, like they actually liked each other. Her brothers never talked like this. Everything they said was sharp, calculated, designed to wound or claim dominance. So, Jace said, leaning forward slightly. Kaelira, right? That's what I heard the boss say. She blinked. I didn't tell him my name. He has a way of knowing things. Jace shrugged. Don't ask me how. Half the time I think he can read minds. He can't, Ren said flatly. He just pays attention, more than most people. Kaelira looked toward where Darian had gone. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, his back to them, his posture rigid. Even from here, she could feel the weight of his presence. Is he... She hesitated. Is he angry? About what I told him? Jace exchanged a glance with Ren. Hard to say. The boss doesn't do angry the way most people do. He's more the silent and planning type. Which is worse, Ren added. Kaelira's stomach twisted. I shouldn't have come. I should have just... Hey! Jace's voice was gentle but firm. You did the right thing. Not a lot of people would have done what you did. Most would have just kept their heads down and let it happen. Or run the other way, Ren said. Far away. I tried running away, Kaelira said quietly. I'm not very good at it, Jace grinned. Well, you made it 3 days in the wild before you got caught by outlaws. That's better than most. And you're still alive, Ren said. That counts for something. Kaelira wasn't sure about that, but she nodded anyway, too tired to argue. But she slept by the fire that night, wrapped in a blanket Jace had given her. It was rough and smelled like smoke and horses, but it was warm, and for the first time in days she felt almost safe. Almost. Her dreams were full of shadows and voices, her father's laugh, her brother's sneers, the outlaw's hands on her arms, pulling her, holding her down. And then Darian's pale eyes, watching her like he could see straight through to the broken parts she kept hidden. She woke with a gasp, her heart racing. The fire had burned down to embers. The camp was quiet, except for the soft sounds of breathing. Jace was asleep on the other side of the fire, his head pillowed on his arm. Ren was on watch, sitting on a fallen log with his back to her, and Darian was gone. Kaelira sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She didn't know where he'd gone, but somehow she felt his absence like a physical thing. He does that, Ren said without turning around. Goes off on his own. Don't worry about it. Kaelira didn't answer. She just stared into the dying embers and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Darian came back just before dawn, moving through the trees so quietly that Kaelira didn't hear him until he was already in the clearing. He looked the same, calm, controlled, unreadable. But there was something different in the way he moved, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He crouched by the fire, stirring the embers back to life with a stick, and glanced at Kaelira. You're awake early, he said. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. He nodded, like that made sense. We're moving out in an hour. Pack your things. Moving where? My stronghold, he said. If what you told me is true, your family will send someone after you. And if they're planning what you said they're planning, I need to deal with it. Kaelira's pulse quickened. Deal with it how? Darian's pale eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something flicker in them. Not anger, something colder. By making sure they regret it, he said. And then he stood and walked away, leaving Kaelira sitting by the fire, her mind racing. She'd warned him. She'd done what she came to do. But now she realized the hard part was just beginning. So they broke camp quickly, the men moving with practiced efficiency. Kaelira tried to help, but Jace waved her off. Just stay close, he said. The forest's not safe this close to the border. Border of what? She asked. Voss territory, Ren said, slinging his pack over his shoulder. Your family's land. We're still too close for comfort. Kaelira's stomach dropped. She hadn't realized they were so near. What if her father had already sent men after her? What if they were out here right now, searching? Darian appeared beside her, his presence solid and grounding. Stay between Jace and me. Don't wander. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Why? Because if we run into trouble, I need to know where you are. Kaelira nodded, her throat tight. They started walking, moving deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, the canopy so dense that barely any light filtered through. The air was cold and damp, and every sound seemed amplified, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Kaelira kept her eyes on Darian's back, focusing on the rhythm of his steps. He moved like the forest was part of him, like he knew every tree, every stone, every hidden path. She wondered how long he'd been out here, how many years he'd spent in the wild, away from the settlements and the politics and the families like hers who thought they could control everything. Keep up, Jace said from behind her, his voice low. Kaelira quickened her pace, her legs aching. They walked for hours. The sun climbed higher, though it was hard to tell with the canopy blocking most of the light. Kaelira's stomach growled, but no one stopped to eat. Finally, as the afternoon light started to fade, Darian raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Kaelira froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything unusual, but Darian was tense, his eyes scanning the trees. What is it? Jace whispered. We're being followed, Darian said quietly. Kaelira's blood went cold. How many? Ren asked, his hand going to his weapon. 3, maybe 4. Darian's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. They've been tracking us for the last mile. Voss men? Jace asked. Probably. Kaelira's hands started shaking. This was her fault. They'd come for her. Darian turned to her, his pale eyes sharp. When I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Understand? She nodded, unable to speak. Good. He looked at Jace and Ren. We draw them out, standard formation. The 2 men nodded and moved into position, disappearing into the trees so quickly and quietly that Kaelira barely saw them go. Darian stayed beside her, his body angled to shield her from whatever was coming. The forest went silent, and then, from the shadows, they came. 4 men, dressed in the colors of House Voss, dark green and gray. Kaelira recognized one of them. Saren's captain, a man named Keldon with a scar across his chin and eyes that had always made her skin crawl. There she is, Keldon said, his voice carrying through the trees. The runaway bride. Darian didn't move. Turn around and go home. You're not taking her. Keldon laughed. You think you can give me orders, Thorn? Lord Voss wants his daughter back, and what Lord Voss wants, he gets. Not this time, Darian said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. Keldon's smile faded. We outnumber you. Do you? As if on cue, Jace and Ren emerged from the trees behind the Voss men, their weapons drawn. Keldon's men spun around, suddenly surrounded. Last chance, Darian said. Leave. Keldon's hand went to his sword. Not without the girl. Everything happened fast. Keldon drew his weapon and lunged toward Kaelira. Darian moved faster than she thought possible, intercepting him with a force that sent both men crashing to the ground. The other Voss men attacked. Jason Wren met them head-on, steel clashing against steel. Kaelira stumbled backward, her heart racing, her mind screaming at her to run. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, watching as Darian fought Keldan, their movements brutal and efficient. Keldan was good, but Darian was better. Within seconds, Keldan was on his back, Darian's hand around his throat. "Tell Greven Voss," Darian said, his voice cold and precise, "that his daughter is under my protection now. If he wants her back, he can come get her himself." He released Keldan, who scrambled backward, coughing and gasping. The other Voss men were down, disarmed but alive. Jace and Wren stood over them, weapons ready. "Go," Darian said. Keldan and his men ran. Kaelira sank to her knees, her legs finally giving out. Darian turned to her, his expression softening slightly. He walked over and crouched in front of her. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I told you. I'm not going to let them take you." Kaelira looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears she didn't want to shed. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Because," he said, "you chose to warn me instead of saving yourself. That's not something I forget." And in that moment, staring into his pale, steady gaze, Kaelira felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, someone saw her. Not the scar, not the ugly daughter, not the disposable pawn, just her. And that changed everything. The stronghold rose from the mountainside like something carved by ancient hands. Stone walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, watchtowers that pierced the sky, gates reinforced with iron that had seen generations of battle. Kaelira had expected something crude, a warlord's camp thrown together with wood and ambition. This was a fortress, a kingdom. "Welcome to Thornreach," Jace said beside her, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "Home sweet home." Kaelira stared up at the walls as they approached. Guards stood at intervals along the ramparts, their eyes tracking the group's movement. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like every person watching could see straight through to all the broken parts she carried. Darian led them through the main gate without breaking stride. Inside, the stronghold was alive with activity. Blacksmiths working forges that glowed orange in the dim light, traders haggling over goods in the market square, children running between stalls while their mothers shouted after them. It was loud and messy and completely unlike the cold silence of her father's estate. People stopped to watch as Darian passed. Some nodded in respect. Others stepped aside quickly, their eyes lowered. But everyone noticed him. And everyone noticed the girl walking behind him, her cloak mud-stained, her face bare for all to see. The whispers started immediately. "Who is she? Look at her face. Is that the Voss girl? Why would he bring her here?" Kaelira pulled her cloak tighter, wishing desperately for her veil. Her scar felt like a brand, something that marked her as other, as wrong. She kept her eyes on the ground, counting her steps, trying to ignore the stares. "Ignore them," Jace murmured. "They'll get used to you." She wasn't sure she believed that. Darian led them to the main keep, a massive structure that dominated the center of the stronghold. Inside, the air was warmer, heated by fires that burned in stone hearths. Servants moved through the halls carrying linens and trays, their movements efficient and practiced. A woman appeared from a side corridor, tall, sharp-featured, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a severe braid. She wore leather armor that had seen real use, and the sword at her hip wasn't decorative. "You're back," she said to Darian, her tone neutral. Then her eyes shifted to Kaelira, and something cold flickered across her face. "And you brought a guest." "Mira," Darian said. "This is Kaelira Voss. She'll be staying with us." Mira's expression didn't change, but Kaelira felt the weight of her judgment like a physical thing. "The Voss girl. I heard about the ambush in the forest. News travels fast. It always does when you kill Greven Voss's men." Mira crossed her arms. "You realize this is an act of war." "It was already war," Darian said quietly. "They just hadn't told us yet." Mira's jaw tightened. "And her? What's her role in this?" "She warned me. About the poison, the assassination plot, everything. How convenient." Mira's eyes never left Kaelira. "The daughter of our enemy suddenly appears in the forest, alone and helpless, with information about a plot. And you just believed her?" "I did." "Why?" Darian was quiet for a moment. Because she had nothing to gain by lying, and everything to lose by telling the truth. Mira shook her head. You're too trusting. And you're too suspicious. Someone has to be. Mira turned her attention back to Kaelira, and her voice dropped into something harder. If you're lying, if this is some scheme your father cooked up, I'll know, and I won't be as merciful as Darian. Kaelira's throat felt tight. I'm not lying. We'll see. Mira turned back to Darian. The council wants to meet, tonight. They've heard about the girl and they're not happy. They never are. This is different. The Voss Alliance controls half the trade routes through the frontier. If we're going to war with them, we need to be prepared. Then prepare, Darian said simply. I'll meet with the council after dinner. Mira hesitated, like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Kaelira let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Don't take it personally, Jay said. Mira doesn't trust anyone. It's kind of her thing. She's right to be suspicious, Kaelira said quietly. If I were her, I wouldn't trust me either. Darian glanced at her, his pale eyes unreadable. Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying. The room he gave her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a wooden chest, and a window that looked out over the eastern mountains. It was more than she'd expected, more than she deserved. There's water in the basin, Darian said from the doorway, and fresh clothes in the chest. Dinner's in 2 hours. Someone will come get you. Thank you, Kaelira said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded and turned to leave. Darian? He stopped, looking back at her. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really? I know what I told you was important, but you could have just, I don't know, sent me away. Let me fend for myself. You didn't have to bring me here. Darian was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When I was younger, he said finally, I was sold to a rival house, a political bargaining chip, like you were supposed to be. They treated me like a weapon, something to be used and discarded. He paused. Someone helped me escape, gave me a chance when they didn't have to. I don't forget things like that. Kaelira stared at him, her chest tight. Get some rest, he said, and then he was gone. She washed her face and changed into the clothes from the chest, simple pants and a tunic that were too big, but clean and warm. Then she sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the last few days. She'd run away. She'd survived the forest. She'd been saved by the man her family wanted dead, and now she was in his stronghold, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her. What was she doing here? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she said. Jace pushed the door open, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Thought you might be hungry. Dinner's not for a while, and you look like you could use something now. Kaelira's stomach growled in response. Thank you. He set the tray on the chest and leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. So, how are you holding up? I don't know, she admitted. Everything feels unreal. Yeah, I bet. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Coming here, telling the boss about your family's plan. Mira doesn't think so. Mira doesn't think anyone does the right thing. She's been burned too many times. He smiled slightly. But she'll come around, probably. And the council? Jace's smile faded. That's going to be harder. They're not going to like this. You being here, I mean. It complicates things. I don't want to cause problems. Too late for that? He said it gently, without malice. But that's not your fault. Your family caused the problems. You're just collateral damage. Kaelira picked at the bread, her appetite fading. What's going to happen? Honestly, I don't know. The boss will handle it. He always does. Jace pushed off the wall. Get some rest, and try not to worry too much. You're safe here. After he left, Kaelira ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Then she lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was safe. For now. But she knew it wouldn't last. Dinner was held in his great hall, a cavernous space with long tables and a fire pit in the center that roared with flames. The room was packed with people, warriors, traders, craftsmen, families. The noise was overwhelming after so many days of silence in the forest. Kaelira sat at the head table, beside Jace and across from Mira, who barely acknowledged her presence. Darian sat at the center, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly moving, taking in everything. The food was simple but plentiful: roasted meat, bread, vegetables, and ale that flowed freely. People ate and talked and laughed, and Kaelira felt like an intruder in someone else's life. "You're not eating," Jace observed. "I'm not very hungry." "You need to eat. You're going to need your strength." "For what?" Before he could answer, the hall doors opened and a man strode in, tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that burned with barely contained anger. The room went quiet. "Thorn," the man said, his voice booming. "We need to talk, now." Darian didn't stand. "Sit down, Gareth. Have some dinner." "I'm not here for dinner. I'm here because you've brought a Voss into our home." Gareth pointed at Kaelira, and every eye in the hall followed. "That girl's family has been bleeding us dry for years. They control the trade routes. They tax our goods. They turn the other houses against us. And now you bring one of them here? Are you insane?" "Careful," Darian said, his voice dropping into something dangerous. "No, I'm done being careful." Gareth stepped closer. "Half the council thinks this is a trap, that she's a spy sent to weaken us from the inside." "And what do you think?" Darian asked. "I think you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Just because she's got a sob story doesn't mean we should trust her." Kaelira felt her face burn. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. "She warned me about an assassination plot," Darian said calmly. "She risked her life to do it. That's not the action of a spy." "Or it's exactly the action of a spy," Gareth shot back. "Gain your trust, feed you information, and when you're vulnerable, strike." "Enough." Darian stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Kaelira Voss is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Gareth's jaw clenched. "This isn't over." "No," Darian agreed. "It's not. But we'll discuss it in the council meeting, not here." Gareth stared at him for a long moment, then turned and stormed out. The doors slammed behind him, and slowly, the noise in the hall resumed. Kaelira couldn't breathe. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurring. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "I need some air," she managed to say, and then she was moving, pushing through the crowd, desperate to get out. She found herself in a courtyard, the night air cold against her flushed skin. She leaned against the wall, her chest heaving, trying to calm down. Footsteps approached, and she knew without looking that it was Darian. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "I shouldn't have come here. I'm making everything worse." "You didn't make anything worse," he said quietly. "Gareth's been looking for a reason to challenge me for months. You're just convenient." "That doesn't make it better." "No, but it's the truth." He moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and grounding. "The council will vote tomorrow on whether to keep you here or send you away." Kaelira's stomach dropped. "And if they vote to send me away, then I'll ignore them." She looked at him, startled. "You can't do that." "I can do whatever I want. I'm the alpha." "And they'll hate you for it. They already hate me for half the decisions I make." He turned to face her fully. "But this one is non-negotiable. You warned me. You chose to do the right thing even when it would have been easier to stay silent. I don't abandon people like that." Kaelira felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't understand you." "Join the club," he said with the ghost of a smile. They stood in silence for a while, the sounds of the stronghold muffled by distance. Finally, Kaelira spoke. "What if they're right? What if I am a liability?" "Then we'll deal with it," Darian said simply. "But I don't think you are." "How can you be so sure?" He looked at her, his pale eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Because I've spent my whole life reading people, knowing who's a threat and who's not. And you bet—" He paused. "You're not a threat. You're just scared." The words hit harder than she expected. Because he was right. She was terrified of her family, of this place, of what came next. But also, for the first time in her life, she felt like someone actually saw her. "Get some sleep," Darian said. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." The council meeting was held in a circular chamber deep within the keep. Kaelira wasn't allowed inside, but she could hear the raised voices echoing through the stone corridors. She sat on a bench outside, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Jace sat beside her, sharpening his knife with long, methodical strokes. "They've been at it for over an hour," he said. "That's actually a good sign." "How is that good?" "Means they're actually debating instead of just voting you out immediately." Kaelira didn't find that comforting. The doors finally opened and Mira emerged, her expression hard. She glanced at Kaelira but didn't say anything as she walked past. Then Gareth came out, his face red with anger. He stopped when he saw Kaelira, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't over, girl," he said. "You might have fooled Thorn, but you haven't fooled me." Before she could respond, he was gone. Finally, Darian appeared in the doorway. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You can stay," he said. "The vote was close, but you can stay." Relief flooded through her so strong it made her dizzy. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. There are conditions." "What conditions?" "You'll be watched. Your movements will be restricted until we're sure you're not a threat, and you'll need to prove yourself." "How?" "We'll figure that out." He started walking and she fell into step beside him. "But first we need to deal with your family." Kaelira's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "They're not going to let this go. They'll come for you, or they'll try to attack the stronghold. Either way, we need to be ready." "You're going to fight them." "If I have to." He glanced at her. "Unless you have a better idea." She thought about her father, her brothers, the way they'd plotted to use her as a weapon, the way they'd thrown her away like garbage. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." That night, Kaelira couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with everything that had happened. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. "Come in," she said. The door opened and a young woman stepped inside, maybe a few years older than Kaelira, with auburn hair and kind eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said. "I'm Alara. I work in the kitchens. I wanted to say thank you." Kaelira blinked. "For what?" "For warning Lord Darian. My brother is one of his guards. If you hadn't said anything, if the poison had worked—" Her voice caught. "A lot of people would have died." Kaelira didn't know what to say. "I know people are scared of you being here," Alara continued. "They're scared of what it means. But I wanted you to know that not everyone feels that way. Some of us are grateful." She left before Kaelira could respond, closing the door softly behind her. Kaelira lay back down, Alara's words echoing in her mind. Maybe she wasn't just a liability. Maybe she could be something more. She just had to figure out what. The attack came 3 days later. Kaelira was in the courtyard when the alarm bells started ringing, their sound sharp and urgent. People began running, grabbing weapons, shouting orders. Jace appeared beside her, his sword already drawn. "Get inside, now!" "What's happening?" "Your family's here." Her blood went cold. Jace grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the keep. "Come on!" But before they could reach the doors, an explosion rocked the stronghold, the blast so loud it made her ears ring. Part of the outer wall collapsed, stone and dust billowing into the air, and through the gap came her father's men. They poured through the breach like a flood, dozens of them, armored and armed, their faces twisted with rage and bloodlust. "Get her to the keep!" someone shouted. "Chet sab." Kaelira ran, her heart pounding, her legs moving on instinct. Behind her she could hear the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, the chaos of battle. She burst through the keep doors and stumbled into the main hall. Mira was there, barking orders to a group of guards. "The girl?" Mira demanded. "She's here," Jace said, breathing hard. Mira's eyes locked onto Kaelira, and for a moment something like sympathy flickered across her face. "This is what you brought us. War." "I didn't—" Kaelira started. "It doesn't matter." Mira turned back to the guards. "Hold the inner gates. Don't let them reach the keep." The guards ran and Mira followed, leaving Kaelira alone with Jace. "This is my fault," Kaelira whispered. "No," Jace said firmly. "This is your family's fault. There's a difference." But Kaelira couldn't shake the guilt that settled in her chest like a stone. Outside, the battle raged, and somewhere in the chaos, Darian was fighting her father's men, defending a stronghold that was under attack because of her. She couldn't just hide. She had to do something. Before Jace could stop her, Kaelira turned and ran. Not deeper into the keep, but back toward the doors, back toward the fighting. "Kaelira, wait!" Jace shouted, but she didn't stop. She burst out into the courtyard, and the scene that greeted her was like something from a nightmare. Bodies on the ground, blood on the stones, Darian fighting at the front, his sword moving with brutal efficiency as he cut down one attacker after another. And there, across the courtyard, she saw him. Her brother Corvain. He was giving orders, directing the assault, his face twisted with fury. Their eyes met, and Corvain smiled. "There you are, little sister," he called out over the noise. "Did you really think you could run from us?" Kaelira's hands clenched into fists. "Come home," Corvain said, "and maybe we'll let some of these people live." She knew he was lying. She knew that even if she went back, her father would destroy this place, would kill everyone who'd helped her. "No," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Corvain's smile faded. "Wrong answer." He raised his hand, and behind him, a group of archers drew their bows, the arrows aimed not at the defenders, but at the civilians huddled near the market square. Kaelira's heart stopped. "Last chance," Corvain said, and then something inside her broke open. It felt like heat, like lightning, like something that had been buried deep and was now tearing its way to the surface. Her scar burned, the pain so intense she cried out. And then the world exploded in light. The light came from her. Kaelira felt it tear through her body like something living, something that had been caged for too long and was now breaking free. Her scar split open, not bleeding, but glowing, white-hot and blinding. The pain was excruciating, like her skull was being pulled apart from the inside. She screamed. The light exploded outward in a wave that knocked everyone to the ground. Voss soldiers, Thornreach defenders, everyone. The force of it shattered windows, cracked stone, sent weapons clattering across the courtyard. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. Kaelira collapsed to her knees, gasping, her whole body shaking. The scar on her face felt different now. Not just a mark, but something active, something alive. She pressed her hand to it, and beneath her fingers she could feel power humming just below the surface. The courtyard was silent. Everyone was staring at her. Corvain was on his back, his face pale with shock. What are you?" Kaelira didn't have an answer. She didn't know what she was. Darian was the first to move. He crossed the courtyard in long strides, his sword still in his hand, and positioned himself between Kaelira and her brother. "Leave," he said, his voice cold and absolute. "Now, before I change my mind about letting you live." Corvain scrambled to his feet, his eyes still locked on Kaelira. "This isn't over. Father will—" "Your father can try," Darian interrupted, "but next time I won't hold back." Corvain hesitated, then gestured sharply to his men. They retreated through the breach in the wall, dragging their wounded with them, their formation broken and scattered. As soon as they were gone, Darian turned to Kaelira. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something she couldn't quite identify. Not fear, not anger, something closer to recognition. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her legs felt like water. Darian offered his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. The courtyard was still silent. Every eye was on her. "Everyone back to your posts," Darian ordered. "Tend to the wounded. Repair the breach. Move." Slowly people began to move, though they kept glancing back at her, their expressions a mix of fear and awe. Mira approached, her face tight. "We need to talk. All of us. Right now." Darian nodded. "The council chamber. 10 minutes." Kaelira sat in a chair in the council chamber, her hands still shaking. Darian stood beside her, his arms crossed. Mira paced near the window. Jace and Ren were there too, along with Gareth and 3 other council members she didn't know. "What the hell was that?" Gareth demanded, his voice sharp. "That light, that power, what is she?" "I don't know," Kaelira said, her voice hoarse. That's never happened before." "You expect us to believe that?" Gareth shot back. "You just unleashed some kind of force that knocked down half our fighters, and you're saying you didn't know you could do it?" "She's telling the truth," Darian said calmly. "Look at her. She's as shocked as we are. Or she's a very good liar." "Enough." Mira stopped pacing and turned to Kaelira. "The scar. It wasn't just a scar, was it?" Kaelira touched her face again, feeling the strange warmth beneath her fingertips. I don't know. I got it when I was 6. A fall. That's what they told me. Who told you? My family, the healer. Mira and Darian exchanged a look. What? Kaelira asked. What is it? Darian crouched in front of her, his pale eyes steady. There are old stories about people born with power. Not magic exactly, something different, something tied to the land itself, to the old bloodlines. I'm just... Kaelira struggled to find words. I'm nobody. My family made sure I knew that. Maybe that's what they wanted you to think, Mira said slowly. If you had power, real power, and they couldn't control it, they'd hide it, Darian finished. Suppress it. Make you think you were weak, broken, useless. Kaelira felt like the floor was dropping out from under her. The healer, after the accident, he did something. He put his hands on my face, and she stopped, the memory coming back in fragments. I remember pain, and then nothing, like something was taken away. A seal, one of the other council members said, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. They sealed your power, probably thought they were protecting themselves. Or protecting the frontier from you, Gareth muttered. She just saved us, Jace said sharply. That blast stopped the attack, gave us time to regroup. Or it was a warning, Gareth countered. A taste of what she could do if she wanted to destroy us. I would never... Kaelira started, but her voice broke. Darian stood. She stays. The council already voted. That hasn't changed. It should, Gareth said. We had no idea what she was when we voted. This changes everything. No, Darian said quietly. It doesn't. The room fell silent. We're keeping her locked up until we know more, Mira said finally. Not in a cell, but confined to the keep with guards. Agreed, Darian said before Kaelira could protest. She wanted to argue, to say that she wasn't dangerous, that she'd never hurt anyone. But the truth was, she didn't know what she was capable of. The power that had erupted from her, it had felt wild, uncontrolled, like something that could just as easily destroy everything around her. Fine, she whispered. They gave her a different room this time, smaller, with no windows and a guard stationed outside the door. It felt less like a guest room and more like a prison, but Kaelira couldn't blame them. She sat on the bed, her hands pressed to her face, trying to make sense of everything. Her whole life had been a lie. The scar, the isolation, the way her family had treated her. It wasn't because she was broken. It was because they were afraid. Afraid of what she might become. And now she'd proven them right. A knock at the door made her look up. Come in, she said. Darian entered, closing the door behind him. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I'm losing my mind. He almost smiled. That's fair. He sat down beside her, not too close but not distant either. For a long moment they just sat in silence. Do you think I'm dangerous? Kaelira asked finally. I think you could be, Darian said honestly. But I don't think you want to be. There's a difference. Gareth doesn't see a difference. Gareth's afraid. Fear makes people stupid. He turned to look at her. But he's not wrong to be cautious. Whatever's inside you, it's powerful. And right now, you don't know how to control it. So what do? You learn. Kaelira laughed bitterly. Learn from who? I don't even know what I am. We'll figure it out, Darian said. There are records, old books, stories, people who might know more. We'll find answers. And if we don't, then we'll figure it out anyway. He stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. He was almost to the door when Kaelira spoke again. Why do you keep helping me? Darian paused, his hand on the door handle. Because everyone deserves a chance to choose who they become. Your family tried to take that from you. I won't. And then he was gone, leaving Kaelira alone with her thoughts. She woke in the middle of the night to voices outside her door. Can't just keep her locked up like an animal. That was Jace. We're not. We're being careful. Mira's voice, firm and unyielding. She's scared. She needs help, not guards. She needs both. Kaelira pressed her ear to the door, listening. What if she loses control again? Mira asked. What if next time people die? She won't. You don't know that. None of us do. There was a long pause. I saw her face, Jace said quietly. When that power hit, she wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was trying to protect them. Intention doesn't matter if the result is the same. Footsteps, moving away. Then silence. Kaelira sat back down on the bed, her chest tight. They were right. She was dangerous. And until she could control whatever was inside her, she was a threat to everyone around her. She just wished she knew how to stop it. What? The next morning, Darian came to her room with the silver-haired council member, the woman who'd mentioned the seal. "This is Thessa," Darian said. "She's our historian. She's been researching your condition." Thessa sat down across from Kaelira, her sharp eyes assessing. "May I see your scar?" Kaelira hesitated, then nodded, pushing her hair back. Thessa leaned forward, studying the mark carefully. "Fascinating. The seal is partially broken. That's why the power is leaking out." "Can you fix it?" Kaelira asked. "Fix it?" Thessa looked surprised. "Why would you want to seal it again? This power is part of you. It's your birthright. It's dangerous. So is fire. So is a sword. That doesn't mean we stop using them. We learn to control them." "I don't know how." "Then you'll learn," Thessa said simply. "I found references to people like you in the old texts. They called them wardens, individuals born with a connection to the land's energy, rare, powerful, and historically either revered or killed, depending on the era." Kaelira's stomach twisted. Killed? People fear what they don't understand, and power without control is terrifying. Thessa leaned back. "But I believe you can learn control. It will take time, and it will be painful, but it's possible." "How long?" "Weeks, maybe months. There's no way to know." Kaelira looked at Darian. "Do I have that kind of time before my family comes back?" His expression darkened. "They will come back. Your brother saw what you did. He'll tell your father, and Greven Voss isn't the type to let something like this go." "Then what do we do?" "We prepare," Darian said, "for war." Yet. The preparations began immediately. The breach in the wall was reinforced. Weapons were sharpened. Scouts were sent to monitor the Voss border. Every able-bodied person in the stronghold was put to work. Kaelira was kept in the keep, but Thessa came every day to work with her, trying to help her understand and control the power inside her. It was brutal. Thessa would push her, forcing the power to the surface, making her hold it, shape it, release it in controlled bursts. Every session left Kaelira exhausted, trembling, sometimes bleeding from her nose or ears. "You're fighting it," Thessa said after one particularly difficult session. "You need to work with it, not against it." "It hurts," Kaelira gasped, wiping blood from her upper lip. "It hurts because you're afraid of it. Stop being afraid." "Easy for you to say." Thessa's expression softened slightly. "I know it's difficult, but this power, it's not your enemy. It's part of you. Treat it like that." Over the following days, Kaelira slowly began to understand. The power wasn't something foreign. It was her, buried and suppressed for so long that it felt alien. But when she stopped fighting, stopped trying to force it back down, it became easier to manage. Not easy, but easier. She could feel it now, humming beneath her skin, waiting. And sometimes, when she was alone, she'd let it rise just a little, just enough to feel its warmth. It was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. 2 weeks after the attack, the scouts returned with grim news. Kaelira was in the council chamber when they reported, standing beside Darian and Mira. "The Voss forces are mobilizing," the lead scout said, a wiry man named Kael with a face like weathered leather. "They've pulled in allies from 3 neighboring houses. We're looking at over 500 men." The room went silent. 500, Gareth repeated. "We have barely 200 fighters." "We have walls," Mira said, "and the high ground." "That won't be enough." Darian's jaw was tight. "What about their approach? When will they reach us?" 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turns." "Not enough time to call for reinforcements," one of the other council members said. "We don't have reinforcements," Mira said flatly. "The other houses won't help us. They're too afraid of Voss retaliation." "Then we hold," Darian said. "We've done it before." Not against these odds, Gareth said. This is suicide. Then leave, Darian said coldly. I won't stop you. Gareth's face reddened, but he didn't move. Kaelira felt like she was suffocating 500 men. Because of her, because she'd run, because she'd warned Darian, because she'd unleashed that power in the courtyard. This is my fault, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. They're coming because of me. My father wants me back, or he wants me dead. Either way, she swallowed hard. Either way, I can stop this. No, Darian said immediately. If I go back, they'll kill you, or worse. Better than letting everyone here die. Darian's eyes flashed. That's not your decision to make. It's my life. And this is my stronghold. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I told you before, I don't abandon people. That includes you. You should. Well, I won't. The room was silent again, the tension thick enough to cut. There might be another option, Thessa said slowly. Everyone turned to her. The power inside Kaelira. If she could control it, truly control it, she could be a weapon, one strong enough to turn the tide. She's not ready, Mira said. No, but she's close. Thessa looked at Kaelira. With the right motivation, the right circumstances, she could access more of it. You're talking about pushing her into a corner, Jace said, forcing her to use power she can barely control. I'm talking about giving her a reason to try. Kaelira's hands were shaking. What if I can't? What if I lose control and hurt our own people? That's the risk, Thessa admitted, but it might be the only chance we have. Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. No, we find another way. There is no other way, Gareth said, and for once he didn't sound angry, just tired. We're outnumbered, outmatched. If the girl's power can help, she's not a weapon, Darian said sharply. But I could be, Kaelira said. Darian turned to her, his expression hard. Don't. Listen to me. She took a breath, steadying herself. My whole life I've been useless. A burden. Something to hide. But this... She touched her scar. This is the first time I've ever had something that could matter, that could help. I want to try. You could die. I could die anyway. At least this way, it means something. Darian stared at her, conflict written across his face. Finally, he looked away. We'll prepare for both scenarios, he said. Traditional defenses and her. It wasn't an agreement, but it wasn't a refusal either. The next 3 days were chaos. The walls were reinforced further, supplies were rationed, civilians were moved to the inner keep, and Kaelira trained with Thessa from dawn until well past dark, pushing herself harder than she ever had. Thessa was relentless, forcing her to tap into deeper wells of power, to hold it longer, to release it with precision instead of wild bursts. By the third day, Kaelira could summon the light without screaming. She could shape it, direct it, send it where she wanted instead of letting it explode in all directions. It still hurt, and she was still terrified of it, but she was learning. On the evening before the attack, Darian found her in the courtyard, sitting alone on the edge of the fountain. He sat down beside her without a word. Are you ready? He asked finally. No, she said honestly. Are you? Never am. They sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the mountains. If this goes wrong, Kaelira started. It won't. But if it does, Kaelira. He turned to look at her, his pale eyes serious. You're not going to die. I won't let you. You can't promise that. Watch me. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that somehow they'd survive this. But she'd seen the numbers, heard the reports. 500 men against 200. They were going to be slaughtered, unless she could stop it. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. What if I'm not strong enough? Then we fight anyway. He stood, offering his hand. Come on. You should get some rest. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. But instead of letting go, he held on for a moment longer. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly, you're not alone. Remember that. Kaelira nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The attack came at dawn. Kaelira was jolted awake by the sound of horns, low, mournful, the signal that the enemy had been sighted. She dressed quickly and ran to the ramparts. The sight that greeted her stopped her cold. The Voss army stretched across the valley like a dark tide. Hundreds of men, organized into tight formations, their banners snapping in the wind. Siege engines rolled forward, catapults, battering rams, ladders, and at the front, mounted on a massive warhorse, was her father. Lord Greven Voss looked exactly as she remembered, broad, imposing, his face hard as stone. Next to him rode Corvain, and behind them, her other brothers. They'd brought everything. Darien stood at the center of the ramparts, his commanders around him. When he saw Kaelira, he gestured for her to come closer. "Stay behind the line," he said. "Don't engage unless you have to. I want to help. You will, when the time comes." The Voss army stopped just outside arrow range. A single rider broke from the formation and approached the gate, carrying a white banner. "They want to talk," Mira said. "Let them," Darien replied. The rider stopped at the base of the wall and called up. "Lord Greven Voss demands an audience with the Alpha." Darien stepped forward. "I'm listening." Another figure rode forward, Greven himself, his presence commanding even from a distance. "Darien Thorn," Greven's voice boomed. "You've harbored my daughter, a fugitive and a traitor. Return her and we'll withdraw." "No," Darien said simply. Greven's expression darkened. "Then you've chosen death." "I've chosen not to hand over an innocent girl to a man who'd use her as a weapon and discard her. She's mine. My blood. You have no claim. She chose to leave. That gives me all the claim I need." Greven was silent for a moment. Then he turned and looked directly at Kaelira, even though she was partially hidden behind the wall. "Kaelira," he called. "Come home. Last chance." Her hands clenched into fists. "I'm already home," she shouted back. Greven's face twisted with rage. "So be it!" He turned his horse and rode back to his army. "Prepare for assault!" Darien roared. The siege engines moved forward, archers lined up. The battering ram began its approach to the gate. Kaelira's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "Remember what I taught you," Thessa said, appearing beside her. "Focus, breathe, control." The first catapult fired, a massive stone arcing through the air and slamming into the wall with a sound like thunder. The impact shook the ramparts, sending people stumbling. Another shot, another. The wall held, but Kaelira could see cracks forming. Arrows began to fly. From the Voss army toward the defenders, from the defenders back. Men started to fall. The battering ram reached the gate and began pounding, each strike reverberating through the stronghold. "It's not going to hold," Mira said grimly. Darien's jaw was set. "It has to." But it didn't. With a deafening crack, the gate splintered. Voss soldiers poured through the breach, their war cries filling the air. The defenders met them head-on, and the courtyard became a battlefield. Kaelira watched from the ramparts, frozen, as people she'd come to know, Jace, Ren, Alara from the kitchens, fought for their lives. And then she saw him. Corvain cutting through the defenders, heading straight for the keep, heading for her. "He's going for the inner gate," someone shouted. Darien turned, his eyes finding Kaelira. "Go! Get inside!" But Kaelira didn't move. Because she knew, if she ran now, they'd chase her. They'd break through the keep's defenses. And everyone would die trying to protect her. She couldn't let that happen. "Kaelira, go!" Darien shouted. Instead, she stepped forward, off the ramparts, into the courtyard. The fighting swirled around her, but she walked through it like she was in a dream. The power inside her was rising, responding to her fear, her anger, her desperation. Corvain saw her and smiled. "There you are." "Leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, just leave." "Can't do that, little sister. Father wants you back. And what Father wants, I know." Kaelira closed her eyes. "I know." The power surged, and this time she didn't fight it, she let it out. The light erupted from her scar, brighter than before, more focused. It shot forward like a spear, slamming into the ground between her and Corvain with enough force to create a shockwave that threw him backward. The fighting stopped. Everyone turned to stare. Kaelira opened her eyes, and they were glowing white. "I said leave," she repeated, and her voice echoed with power. For the first time in her life, her brother looked afraid. But behind him, more soldiers were coming, and in the distance she could see her father, his face twisted with fury. The power inside her was growing, expanding, becoming something she couldn't hold back. "Kaelira!" Darian's voice somewhere behind her. "Don't!" But it was too late. The seal broke completely, and the world turned white. The world didn't end in fire or darkness. It ended in light so pure and absolute that for a moment there was nothing else. No sound, no pain, no fear, just white. When Kaelira could see again, she was on her knees in the center of a crater. The stone beneath her was scorched black, radiating outward in perfect circles like ripples on water. The courtyard had gone completely silent. She looked up. Every Voss soldier within 50 feet was on the ground, unconscious or groaning. Corvain was sprawled against the remains of a wagon, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide and unfocused. Beyond the breach, the rest of the army had stopped advancing, staring at the aftermath like they'd just witnessed something impossible. Kaelira tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body felt wrong, hollow and heavy at the same time. The power that had erupted from her was gone now, but she could still feel its echo, like the ringing in your ears after a thunderclap. "Kaelira!" Darian was beside her, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. His face was pale, his eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Everything hurt in a distant, disconnected way. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." Her voice came out hoarse. I couldn't stop it." Around them, the Thorn-Reach defenders were getting to their feet, checking themselves for injuries, staring at the destruction. Some looked at her with awe, others with fear. Jace appeared, his sword still in his hand, blood on his armor, but none of it his. "Boss, they're regrouping. Whatever she did bought us time, but they're not retreating." Darian helped Kaelira to her feet, his grip firm. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Then get inside. Now." "No." Kaelira pulled away from him, her legs shaking but holding. "If I hide, they'll keep coming. They won't stop until—" A sound cut through the courtyard, low and rumbling like distant thunder. But it wasn't thunder, it was drums. The Voss army was advancing again, this time in formation, shields raised, moving with brutal efficiency. And at their front, mounted and furious, was Lord Greven Voss himself. "Archers!" Mira shouted from the wall. "Loose!" Arrows flew, but most bounced off the raised shields. The Voss forces kept coming, stepping over their fallen, closing the distance. "We can't hold them," Ren said, his face grim. "Not if they breach the inner courtyard." Darian's jaw was tight. He looked at Kaelira, conflict written across his face. Then he turned to his fighters. "Fall back to the keep. Defensive positions." The defenders retreated in organized chaos, forming a line at the inner gate. Kaelira moved with them, her mind racing. The power inside her was still there, but it felt distant now, like trying to grab water with your bare hands. The Voss soldiers poured through the breach, hundreds of them, their war cries echoing off the stone walls. And then everything changed. From beyond the broken outer wall, something else appeared. Not soldiers. Creatures. They moved wrong, too fast, too fluid, their forms shifting like smoke given weight. They were roughly human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Skin that looked like cracked stone, eyes that glowed red, mouths full of teeth that didn't belong in anything living. "What the hell are those?" Jace breathed. "Wraiths," Thessa said, appearing beside them, her face ashen. "Your father made a deal with something he shouldn't have." The creatures fell on the Voss soldiers from behind, tearing through them with claws that left smoking wounds. Screams filled the air, not war cries, but genuine terror. The Voss formation broke instantly, soldiers scattering as the wraiths moved through them like a scythe through wheat. "They're not distinguishing between armies," Mira said, horror in her voice. "They're killing everyone." She was right. The wraiths were moving toward the stronghold now, cutting down Voss and Thorn-Reach fighters alike. "Inside!" Darian roared. "Everyone inside! Bar the gates!" The defenders scrambled for the keep, dragging their wounded. The massive inner doors swung shut, and heavy bars were thrown across them. Through the narrow windows, Kaelira watched the massacre in the courtyard. The wraiths moved with terrible purpose, their claws rending armor like cloth. Even Greven's elite guards fell within seconds. "He did this," Kaelira whispered. My father. He brought those things here to destroy us, Thessa said. But he can't control them. No one can. A wraith slammed into the door, and the wood splintered. Another joined it, their combined strength making the bars groan. They're going to break through, Gareth said, backing away from the door. Archers on the murder holes, Mira commanded. Slow them down! Arrows fired down through slots in the ceiling, but they passed through the wraiths like they were made of smoke, doing nothing. Another impact. The door cracked further. Kaelira felt the power inside her stir, responding to the danger. But she was exhausted, drained from the earlier blast. She didn't know if she had enough left. There has to be a way to stop them, Darian said, turning to Thessa. In the old stories, there's always a way. Fire, Thessa said quickly. They're beings of shadow and corruption. Pure light or pure fire can destroy them, but what? It would take more power than any one person could generate, unless... She looked at Kaelira. No, Darian said immediately. She's already pushed too far. I can do it, Kaelira said, though her hands were shaking. You'll kill yourself. Maybe, but if I don't, those things will kill everyone. Another crash. One of the bars broke. Darian stared at her, his pale eyes intense. There's another way. There has to be. There isn't, Thessa said quietly. I'm sorry. The door splintered, and a wraith's claw punched through, reaching blindly for whoever was closest. Kaelira made her decision. She stepped forward, placing her hands on the damaged door. The wood was cold beneath her palms, vibrating with each impact. Kaelira, don't... Darian started. I need you to trust me, she said, meeting his eyes. Please. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. Kaelira closed her eyes and reached for the power. It didn't want to come this time. It was buried deep, exhausted, reluctant. She had to drag it to the surface, and every inch felt like pulling a knife through her own chest. The scar on her face began to glow. Everyone get back, Thessa ordered. The defenders retreated to the far side of the hall as Kaelira's whole body started to emit light. It wasn't the wild, explosive burst from before. This was controlled, deliberate, building slowly like a fire being carefully fed. But it hurt. It hurt worse than anything she'd ever felt. The wraiths sensed it. Their assault on the door intensified, their shrieks rising to an inhuman pitch. Hold, Kaelira whispered to herself. Just hold. The light grew brighter, and she could feel it spreading through her like molten metal through her veins. She was burning from the inside out, and then she released it. The light exploded outward, but not in a sphere this time. It poured through the cracks in the door, through the windows, through every gap in the stone. It flooded the courtyard in a wave of pure, cleansing fire. The wraith's shrieks turned to something worse, a sound like reality itself being torn. And then, one by one, they burned away to nothing, their forms dissolving in the light. Kaelira held it as long as she could, pouring everything she had into the flame. Her vision was darkening at the edges, her legs giving out. And then it was done. She collapsed, and Darian caught her before she hit the ground. The courtyard was silent. The wraiths were gone, and so were most of the Voss soldiers, either fled or dead. Is she... Someone started. She's alive, Darian said, his voice rough. Barely. Get Thessa, now. Kaelira could barely hear him. Everything was fading, like she was sinking underwater, but she could feel his arms around her, solid and real, anchoring her to the world. You did it, he was saying. You stopped them. Just stay with me. Stay. But the darkness pulled her under, and she heard nothing more. She woke to pain, not the sharp, immediate pain of injury, but a deep, bone-aching exhaustion that made even breathing feel like work. She was in a bed, soft, warm, nothing like the narrow cot in her locked room. Easy, Darian's voice. Kaelira turned her head and saw him sitting beside the bed, his face drawn with fatigue. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. How long? She managed to ask. 2 days. Thessa said you'd burned through so much energy that your body just shut down. He leaned forward. You almost didn't wake up. But I did. Yeah. Something flickered across his face, relief maybe, or something deeper. You did. Kaelira tried to sit up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Darian helped her, adjusting the pillows behind her back. "The wraiths?" she asked. "Gone. You destroyed them all." "And my father's army?" "Scattered. Most fled when the wraiths appeared. The rest—" He paused. "We're still clearing the courtyard. There are a lot of dead." Kaelira closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For all of this. If I hadn't come here—" "Stop." Darian's voice was firm. "You didn't bring those creatures. Your father did. This is on him, not you." "Is he alive?" "He retreated with what was left of his forces, but he's broken. His alliance is in shambles. The other houses saw what he did, bringing those things, risking everyone, and they've turned against him." "So it's over?" Darian was quiet for a moment. "For now. He'll try again eventually. Men like him always do. But we have time." Kaelira looked down at her hands. They were wrapped in clean bandages, though she didn't remember being injured. "What about the stronghold, the people?" "We lost 43 fighters, another dozen civilians caught in the initial breach." His voice was heavy. "But it could have been worse, would have been, if not for you." "I don't feel like a hero." "Heroes usually don't." There was a knock at the door, and Mira entered, followed by Jace and several other people Kaelira didn't recognize. They all looked at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. "She's awake," Mira said, and there was something different in her tone. Not warmth, exactly, but no longer the cold suspicion from before. "We need to talk," one of the strangers said, an older man with gray hair and a face marked by old scars. "About what happened. About what you are." Kaelira tensed, but Darian held up a hand. "She just woke up. This can wait." "It can't," the man said. "Word is spreading. About the girl who destroyed an army with light. About the warden who rose in Thornreach." "Warden?" Kaelira repeated. "That's what they're calling you," Jace said, a slight smile on his face. "Seems it stuck." "The other houses are asking questions," Mira said. "Some are afraid, some are interested. Either way, things have changed." "What does that mean?" Kaelira asked. "It means," the gray-haired man said, "that you're not just a refugee anymore. You're a power. And people will either want to use you or destroy you." "Then they can try," Darian said coldly. "She's under my protection." "For now," the man said, "but that won't be enough if the whole frontier turns against her." "Then we'll deal with it." Darian stood, his posture making it clear the conversation was over. "Everyone out. She needs rest." They filed out slowly, though Kaelira caught the looks they gave her. Some fearful, some respectful, all uncertain. When the room was empty except for Darian, Kaelira finally let herself relax. "They're afraid of me," she said quietly. "They're afraid of what you represent. Change. Power they don't understand." He sat back down beside the bed. "But fear can turn to respect, given time. And if it doesn't, then we'll figure it out." He met her eyes. "You're not alone in this." Those words, the same ones he'd said before the battle, settled something in Kaelira's chest. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "I told you before, I don't abandon people, especially not people who prove themselves the way you have." Kaelira felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "What happens now?" "Now you heal, get your strength back." He paused. "And then we figure out what comes next. Together." The next few weeks were strange. Kaelira's recovery was slow. Thessa said she'd pushed her body past its limits, and it would take time to rebuild her strength. But gradually, she started to feel more like herself again. The stronghold was different now. People still stared at her, but the quality of their stares had changed. Less disgust, more curiosity. Some even nodded when she passed, a gesture of respect she'd never experienced before. The scar on her face had changed too. It no longer looked like a wound. The skin was smooth now, marked with faint silvery lines that seemed to catch the light. Thessa said it was the seal breaking completely, the mark of what she truly was. Kaelira caught her reflection in a basin one morning and barely recognized herself. Not because of the scar, but because of the person looking back at her. She stood straighter now, held her head higher, She looked like someone who'd fought and survived. Mira started training her, not in power, Thessa handled that, but in combat. You can't rely on that light every time, Mira said, handing her a practice sword. You need to know how to fight without it. The training was brutal, and Kaelira was terrible at first, but she improved. Slowly. One evening, as they finished a session, Mira actually smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. You're getting better, she said. High praise from you. Don't get used to it. But there was no edge to the words. Jace had appointed himself her unofficial guard, appearing whenever she left her room. Not that you need protecting, he said with a grin, but humor me. Even Gareth had softened, though he still watched her with caution. You saved us, he admitted one day, his tone grudging. I was wrong about you. Only partially wrong, Kaelira said. He almost laughed. But the biggest change was Darian. He'd always been kind to her, protective, but now there was something else. He sought her out, asking her opinion on council matters, including her in decisions about the Stronghold's future. He treated her not as a guest or a refugee, but as an equal. And sometimes, when they were alone, she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. One night, they stood together on the ramparts, watching the sun set over the mountains. The scouts report your father's forces have pulled back to his home territory, Darian said. He's fortifying, but he's not making any moves against us. He's afraid, Kaelira said. Of me. Good. He should be. She looked at him. Do you ever worry about what I might become? No. You should. I worry about it all the time. Darian turned to face her fully. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Kaelira's breath caught. What? Someone who chose courage over safety, who risked everything to do the right thing, who saved hundreds of people even though it nearly killed her. He paused. That's who you are, Kaelira. Not the power, not the scar. You. She felt tears building again, and this time she didn't fight them. I don't know how to be that person. You already are. They stood in silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. And for the first time in her life, Kaelira felt something she'd never thought possible. She felt at home. The messenger arrived a week later, bearing the seal of the Council of Houses, the governing body that theoretically ruled the frontier, though in practice they mostly argued and accomplished nothing. Darian read the letter, his expression darkening. What is it? Mira asked. They're calling a conclave, all the houses. They want to discuss the warden situation. Meaning they want to decide what to do about Kaelira, Thessa said. Can they do that? Jace asked. They can try, Darian said, but they don't have authority over Thornreach. They have enough allied houses to make things difficult, Mira pointed out. If they united against us, they won't. Half of them hate the other half too much to agree on anything. Still, Gareth said slowly, it might be worth attending. Make our position clear. Darian looked at Kaelira. What do you think? She was startled by the question. You're asking me? It's your life they're debating. You should have a say. Kaelira thought about it, about hiding in the stronghold while others decided her fate, about going back to being invisible, powerless, someone who didn't matter. I'll go, she said. I'll face them. Darian smiled. Good. So, the journey to the conclave took 3 days. They traveled with a small group, Darian, Mira, Jace, Thessa, and a dozen guards. Kaelira rode beside Darian, her new sword at her hip, her confidence growing with each mile. The conclave was held in neutral territory, in a massive stone hall that had seen centuries of debates and decisions. When they arrived, the other houses were already there, their banners displayed around the chamber, and at the far end, isolated and diminished, sat Lord Greven Voss. Kaelira's steps faltered when she saw him. He looked smaller than she remembered, older, beaten. When his eyes met hers, she saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, not hatred, fear. The proceedings began with speeches, long, boring declarations from various house leaders about tradition and stability and the dangers of unchecked power. Kaelira sat through it all, her hands folded, her expression calm. Finally, the arbiter, an ancient woman who'd been mediating these councils for 40 years, turned to her. Kaelira Voss, you stand accused of wielding dangerous power without sanction or control. How do you answer? Kaelira stood. Every eye in the hall turned to her. I answer that I used my power to defend innocent people from an army that would have slaughtered them. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. You destroyed men, one of the house leaders said. Killed them with light. I destroyed creatures that were killing everyone. The men who died made their choice when they followed my father into battle. Your father, the arbiter said, her gaze shifting to Grevin. What say you, Lord Voss? Grevin stood slowly, and Kaelira saw how much he'd aged in just weeks. His shoulders were stooped, his face haggard. He stopped, his voice catching. I made a mistake. A terrible one. I sought power, and it destroyed everything. The room went silent. My daughter, Grevin continued, looking at Kaelira, was never meant to be a weapon. She was meant to be a tool I could use and discard, but she became something I never imagined, something better than I deserved. Kaelira's chest tightened. I don't ask for forgiveness, Grevin said. I don't deserve it, but I will say this. Whatever power she has, she used it to save lives, not to take them. That's more than I can say for myself. He sat down heavily, and for the first time in her life, Kaelira felt something like pity for the man who'd made her life hell. The arbiter looked at Kaelira. The council will deliberate. You may— No. Darian stood, his voice cutting through the hall. There's nothing to deliberate, he continued. Kaelira Voss is a citizen of Thornreach. She's under my protection and my authority. This council has no jurisdiction over her. You overstep, Alpha, one of the house leaders said. Do I? Or are you just afraid of what she represents? Darian's eyes swept the room. Change. Power that doesn't bow to your outdated traditions. A future that looks different than the past. She could destroy us all, someone shouted. She could, Darian agreed, but she won't, because unlike you, she understands that power without purpose is just destruction. He turned to Kaelira and held out his hand. Come on, he said. We're done here. Kaelira took his hand and stood. Together, they walked out of the hall, leaving the council in stunned silence. Outside, in the cold mountain air, Kaelira finally let herself breathe. You just made enemies of half the frontier, she said. I already had enemies. What's a few more? They'll come after us. Let them try. He looked at her, his pale eyes steady. You're worth it. And in that moment, Kaelira understood something fundamental. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was standing her ground. And she wasn't alone. The ride back to Thornreach was tense. No one spoke much, and the silence hung heavy between them like storm clouds waiting to break. Kaelira could feel the weight of what Darian had done, walking out of the conclave, rejecting the council's authority, claiming her as Thornreach's own. It was a declaration of independence that would have consequences. They were 2 days from home when the scouts spotted the army. How many? Darian asked, his voice calm but his hand already on his sword. At least 200, the lead scout reported, his horse stamping nervously. Maybe more. 3 houses combined. Merrick, Steele, and Hendrith. They're moving fast. They didn't waste time, Mira muttered. Were you expecting them to? Thessa asked. Darian turned to look at Kaelira. Can you fight? She felt the power inside her, still there, but quieter now, more controlled. Yes. Good, because they're not here to talk. The army caught up to them before sunset, blocking the mountain pass that led home. Kaelira recognized the lead commander, Lord Steele, a man with a reputation for brutality and a face like weathered granite. He sat on his warhorse, flanked by his captains, and surveyed Darian's small group with cold satisfaction. Thorn, he called out, you've made a grave mistake. Have I? Darian's voice was almost bored. You defied the council, harbored a dangerous weapon, and now you think you can just ride back to your fortress like nothing happened? That's exactly what I think. Steele's jaw tightened. Then you're a fool. The council voted, unanimously. The girl is to be taken into custody and sealed, her power contained. Sealed, Kaelira repeated, her stomach twisting. You mean imprisoned. For the safety of the frontier, Steele said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. You're too dangerous to be left free. She saved hundreds of lives, Jace said sharply, while you were sitting in your halls counting coins. She killed dozens of men with a thought. What happens when she decides she doesn't like someone? When she gets angry? When she loses control? Steele shook his head. We can't allow that risk. You can't allow it, Darian said quietly. Or you can't control it. The words hung in the air. Last chance, Thorn. Hand her over, and we'll let the rest of you pass. No. Then you'll die with her. Steele raised his hand, and his forces began to advance, shields locked, weapons ready. 200 trained soldiers against a dozen guards and a handful of fighters. Kaelira felt the power rising in response to her fear, her anger. She could end this. One blast like before, and most of them would fall. But then what? More would come, and more after that. This wouldn't end with one battle. Darian, she said quietly, let me go. He looked at her like she'd struck him. What? If I surrender, they'll let you pass. You and everyone else. You can go home. That's not happening. Listen to me. No. His voice was hard. I told you before, I don't abandon people. That hasn't changed. Even if it costs you everything? Even then, Kaelira felt something crack in her chest, but not with pain. With something else. Something warm. The army was 50 feet away now. 40. Any last words? Steele called. Darian's hand went to his sword, and the others followed suit. They'd fight, outnumbered and outmatched, because that's who they were. And Kaelira realized she couldn't let them. She stepped forward, raising her hands. The power came easily now, flowing through her like water finding its course. Light began to emanate from her palms, bright but not blinding. Stop, she said, and her voice carried across the pass with unnatural clarity. The army hesitated. I'll come with you, Kaelira continued, on one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions, Steele said. Aren't I? She let the light grow brighter. I could kill every one of your men right now, turn them to ash. But I won't. Because unlike you, I don't see people as expendable. Steele's horse shifted nervously beneath him. What's your condition? Let them pass, let them go home, and I'll surrender myself to the council's judgment. Kaelira, no, Darian said, grabbing her arm. She looked at him, memorizing his face, the sharp angles, the pale eyes, the strength that ran deeper than muscle and bone. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Then she pulled away and walked toward the army, her hands still glowing with restrained power. Wait, Steele said, and something in his voice had changed. What makes you think we'll keep that bargain? Because if you don't, Kaelira said, stopping 10 feet from his horse, I'll make sure your name becomes synonymous with the man who broke his word to a warden. Every house, every traitor, every person on this frontier will know you as an oath breaker, and that reputation will destroy you. Steele's face flushed with anger. You threaten me? I'm stating facts. She let the light fade from her hands. Now, do we have a deal? For a long moment, no one moved. Then Steele nodded curtly. They can pass, but you come with us. Now. Kaelira turned back to look at Darian one more time. He was staring at her with an expression of absolute fury and something else. Something raw that made her chest ache. I'm sorry, she mouthed. Then she walked into the midst of the army, and they closed ranks around her like a cage. They bound her hands, not with rope, but with chains wrapped in cloth that Thessa later told her were designed to suppress power. They felt cold and wrong against her skin, making the light inside her dim and distant. Steele took her sword, her knife, everything except the clothes on her back. Move out, he commanded. As they marched away, Kaelira looked back once and saw Darian still standing there, frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. And then the pass curved, and he disappeared from view. The journey to the council's stronghold took 4 days. They kept her isolated, surrounded by guards who wouldn't meet her eyes. They fed her sparingly and let her sleep only under heavy watch. But they didn't hurt her. They were too afraid. On the 4th day, they reached the Hall of Judgment, an ancient fortress built into the side of a mountain, all black stone and iron gates. Kaelira was taken to a cell deep underground where the walls were thick enough to muffle any sound. The chains stayed on. She sat in the dark for what felt like hours, maybe days. Time lost meaning. The only light came from a small grate near the ceiling, and even that was dim. Finally, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The cell door opened, and the arbiter entered, followed by 2 guards. "You chose this," the old woman said without preamble. "I did." "Foolish. You could have fought, killed them all, and proven them right about me." Kaelira leaned back against the cold stone wall. "No, I'd rather prove them wrong." The arbiter studied her with shrewd eyes. "The council will decide your fate tomorrow. Most want you sealed permanently, locked away where you can never use your power again. And you? I think you're the most interesting thing to happen to this frontier in 50 years. She smiled slightly. "But my opinion doesn't count for much anymore." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "I believe you when you say you don't want to hurt anyone. But wanting something and achieving it are very different things." Then she was gone, and Kaelira was alone again. That night she dreamed of Darien, of the stronghold, of standing on the ramparts and watching the sun set over mountains that had started to feel like home. She woke to the sound of an explosion. The cell door blew inward, the metal twisting and groaning. Through the smoke stepped a figure, broad-shouldered, moving with deadly purpose, pale eyes burning with fury. Darien. Behind him were Jace, Mira, Ren, and at least 20 Thornreach fighters. "What? How?" Kaelira started. "Did you really think I'd let them keep you?" Darien said, crossing to her in 3 strides. He grabbed the chains on her wrists and, with strength that shouldn't have been possible, tore them apart. The suppression lifted instantly, and Kaelira gasped as the power flooded back. "We need to move," Mira said from the doorway. "The whole place is waking up." "Can you walk?" Darien asked. Kaelira nodded, still stunned. "You came for me." "Of course I did. But the council, the other houses, this is war." Darien smiled grimly. "Let them bring it." They ran through corridors lit by torchlight and chaos. Alarms were blaring, guards shouting, the sound of steel on steel echoing from somewhere above. "How many did you bring?" Kaelira asked as they climbed a spiral staircase. "Everyone," Jace said. "The whole stronghold mobilized. People you've never even met volunteered." "Why?" "Because you saved us," Mira said simply. "And we don't forget that." They burst out into a courtyard where the real battle was raging. Thornreach forces had engaged the hall's guards, and the fighting was fierce. But Kaelira could see they were outnumbered, being pushed back toward the gates. "There's too many," Ren said. "We can't hold." Kaelira looked at Darien. "I can stop this, but I need you to trust me." "I do." She stepped into the center of the courtyard, raised her hands, and let the power rise. But this time, she didn't release it as destruction. She shaped it, controlled it, wove it into something different. The light spread out in a dome, expanding from her in rippling waves. But instead of burning or destroying, it simply stopped everyone in their tracks. Friend and foe alike found themselves unable to move, held by a force that was gentle but absolute. Kaelira's voice rang out, amplified by the power. "Enough! No more fighting! No more death!" In the sudden silence, she addressed the guards, the council members who'd emerged from the hall, everyone watching. "You're afraid of me," she said. "I understand. I was afraid of myself once, afraid of what I might become, what I might do. But fear isn't solved by chains or cells or seals. It's solved by trust, by choosing to see people as they are, not what we imagine they might become." She let the dome fade slightly, giving people the freedom to move but not to attack. "I don't want to rule anyone," Kaelira continued. "I don't want power over the frontier. I just want to live, to be free, to help where I can. Is that so terrible?" The arbiter stepped forward, leaning heavily on her staff. "And if we refuse? If we try to imprison you again? Then I'll leave. Go somewhere far from here where I won't be anyone's problem." Kaelira met her eyes. "But Thornreach will come with me, and anyone else who wants a different kind of frontier, one built on trust instead of fear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Steele pushed forward, his face red with anger. "You can't just... This is sedition, rebellion." "This is choice," Darien said, moving to stand beside Kaelira. "Something you've forgotten about. The council won't allow this." "The council," the arbiter said quietly, "is no longer relevant." Everyone turned to stare at her. Look around you, she continued, gesturing to the courtyard. Half of Thornreach came to rescue one girl who could have destroyed you all but chose peace instead. That's power, real power. Not the kind that comes from councils or votes or ancient traditions. The kind that comes from actually caring about people. She looked at Kaelira. You asked if wanting something and achieving it are different things. I was wrong. You've achieved something I've never seen in all my years. You've made people choose loyalty over fear. She turned to the assembled guards and council members. I'm dissolving this conclave. As of now, each house governs itself. Make your own alliances, your own choices. But leave this girl alone. You can't— Steele started. I just did. The Arbiter's voice cracked like a whip. And if anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with her. She pointed at Kaelira. I suspect that won't go well for them. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the guards began lowering their weapons. The tension bled out of the courtyard like air from a punctured bladder. Kaelira released the dome completely, letting everyone move freely again. And to her shock, some of them, the younger guards, a few of the servants who'd been watching, actually bowed. Not in submission, in respect. Come on, Darian said quietly, taking her hand. Let's go home. The journey back to Thornreach felt different, lighter. People waved as they passed through villages. Traders offered them food and supplies. Word had spread about what happened at the hall, and the story had grown in the telling. The warden who'd broken chains with light. The alpha who'd stormed a fortress for one girl. The beginning of a new frontier. Kaelira wasn't sure she recognized herself in those stories, but she was starting to believe them. When they finally crested the ridge and saw Thornreach spread below them, the stronghold lit by evening light, Kaelira felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like belonging. Welcome home, Jace said, grinning, and this time Kaelira believed it. The celebration that night was unlike anything Kaelira had ever seen. The Great Hall was packed with people, fighters, families, traders who'd come from miles away to be part of it. Food and drink flowed freely, and the noise was deafening, but in a good way. Kaelira sat at the head table beside Darian, watching as Jace told an increasingly exaggerated version of the rescue to a group of wide-eyed children. And then the boss kicked the door so hard it flew off its hinges, Jace was saying, his arms spread wide. He used a battering ram, Mira corrected from nearby. Details! Jace waved her off. Kaelira laughed, and the sound felt strange. Foreign. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this, freely, without fear. You look happy, Darian observed. I am. She turned to him. Thank you, for coming for me, for everything. You don't need to thank me. I do, though. You didn't have to risk your people, your stronghold, everything you've built. Yes, he interrupted quietly. I did. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Dance with me, Darian said suddenly. Kaelira blinked. What? Dance with me. It's a celebration. People dance at celebrations. I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. He stood and offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Kaelira took it. The hall had cleared a space for dancing, and couples were already moving to the music, a lively tune played by a fiddle and drum. Darian led her into the space, and they started to move, awkward and out of sync, but somehow perfect anyway. Kaelira stumbled, and Darian caught her, pulling her closer. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small or broken or less than. She felt seen. I was terrified, Darian admitted quietly as they moved. When you surrendered yourself, I thought— He stopped. Thought what? That I'd lost you. And I realized I couldn't— He met her eyes. I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Kaelira's breath caught. Darian, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. But she wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she felt the same, that somewhere between the forest and the battle and the cells, he'd become the most important person in her world. Instead, she just held on tighter, and they danced until the music faded and the night grew late. Over the following weeks, Thornreach changed. People who'd been displaced by the fighting, who'd lost homes to Voss raids or council politics, began arriving. They'd heard the stories about the stronghold that chose loyalty over fear, about the warden who protected instead of destroyed. Kaelira found herself in the strange position of being looked to for guidance. People asked her opinion on disputes, on resource allocation, on building plans for expanding the stronghold. "You're good at this," Mira observed one day as Kaelira helped mediate an argument between two traders. "I'm just trying to be fair." That's more than most manage. The stronghold grew. New walls were built, new homes raised, the market expanded. And slowly, carefully, Kaelira began to build relationships with the other houses. The ones who hadn't joined Steele's coalition, who were curious about what Thornreach was becoming. Word came that her father had died. Quietly, in his sleep, broken by his failures. Kaelira felt nothing. No grief, no relief. Just a distant sadness for a man who'd wasted his life trying to control what he should have nurtured. Her brothers had scattered, the Voss house collapsing without its patriarch. Corvain had fled to distant lands. The others simply disappeared into obscurity. "Are you all right?" Darian asked when she received the news. "I think so," Kaelira said. "He was my father, but he stopped being my family a long time ago." "Then who is your family now?" Kaelira looked around the hall, at Jace laughing with the guards, at Mira training new recruits, at Thessa bent over ancient texts, at all the people who'd chosen this place, this life. "This," she said. "All of this." 6 months after the battle at the hall, the Arbiter came to visit. She was older, frailer, but her eyes were still sharp. "I'm dying," she announced over dinner, as casually as commenting on the weather. "I'm sorry," Kaelira said, though the old woman waved her off. "Don't be. I've lived longer than I deserved." She leaned forward. "I came to ask you something. When I'm gone, the frontier will need someone to mediate disputes, someone people trust." "You want me to take your place?" "Not exactly. I want you to build something better. Not a council of old men arguing in halls, but a network. Different houses working together because they choose to, not because they're forced." "That's not how power works." "Maybe it's time power worked differently." The Arbiter smiled. "You've already started. Thornreach is proof that it's possible." Kaelira thought about it, about the life she'd built here, the people who depended on her. "I can't do it alone," she said finally. "You won't have to." The Arbiter glanced at Darian, who was listening quietly. "You have an alpha who'd walk through fire for you. That's not nothing." After the Arbiter left, Kaelira and Darian stood on the ramparts, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Are you going to do it?" he asked. "Build her network?" "I don't know. It's a lot of responsibility." "You've never run from responsibility before." "There's a first time for everything." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "Fair enough." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Darian spoke again. "I have a proposition for you." Kaelira looked at him. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind where we stop pretending we're just allies or friends or whatever careful word we've been using." He turned to face her fully. "The kind where we acknowledge that this," he gestured between them, "is something more." Kaelira's heart was racing. "Darian, I know the timing's terrible. I know there's still threats out there, still problems to solve, but I've spent my whole life waiting for the right moment, and I'm done waiting." He took her hands. "I want you. Not just as the warden or as someone under my protection, as my partner, my equal, my, Yes," Kaelira interrupted. He blinked. "Yes?" "Yes to all of it. To building something new. To being your partner." She smiled. "To whatever comes next." He pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, Kaelira rested her forehead against his. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we build," Darian said simply. "A stronghold, a network, a frontier that's better than the one we inherited." "That's a tall order." "Good thing we have time." And they did. Years of it. Years of building and fighting and learning and growing. Thornreach became a beacon, a place where power meant protection, where strength came from unity, where a girl with a scar became a symbol of something better. Other houses joined their network, some grudgingly, some eagerly. Trade routes opened, old feuds were settled. The frontier didn't become perfect. Nothing ever did. But it became fairer, kinder, better. Kaelira and Darian ruled side by side, neither above the other, both changed by what they'd built together. On quiet nights, when the stronghold was peaceful and the stars were bright, they'd stand on the ramparts and remember how it started, with a scared girl running from a fate she didn't choose, with an alpha who chose to see beyond the scar, with a decision to trust instead of fear. And sometimes Kaelira would touch the silvery lines on her face, no longer a mark of shame, but a reminder of who she'd become, and smile. She'd been called ugly, broken, cursed. She'd been hidden, dismissed, thrown away. But she'd risen. Not in spite of what they'd done to her, but because of what she'd chosen to do with it. She'd taken their rejection and turned it into revolution, their fear into freedom, their cage into a kingdom. And in a world that had tried to erase her, she'd become impossible to ignore. The girl marked for sacrifice had become the woman who changed everything. And that, Kaelira thought, as Darian's hand found hers in the darkness, was the best revenge of all. Not destruction, but becoming exactly who she was always meant to be.